You're floating in space a few 100,000 kilometers from Earth, and suddenly, boom, an explosion rocks your spacecraft. Your oxygen is leaking, power is failing, and you've got just minutes to figure out how to survive. Sounds like a sci-fi movie, right? But this actually happened. 3 astronauts faced this nightmare. They were supposed to land on the moon, but instead they were fighting for their lives in the cold, dark void of space. How did they survive? What went wrong? And why is this mission called NASA's successful failure? Stick around, because this story is about courage, ingenuity, and one of the most incredible rescues in history. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Let's rewind to April 1970. NASA was on a roll. Just a year earlier, Apollo 11 had made a history by landing the first humans on the moon. Neil Armstrong's famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," were still echoing around the world. Apollo 12 followed, and it was another success. Now it was Apollo 13's turn. The goal? To explore a region of the moon called Framara, a large crater that scientists were eager to study. The crew consisted of 3 astronauts, Commander James Lovell, Commander Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Haise. These guys were seasoned professionals, ready to make their mark in space history. On April 11, 1970, Apollo 13 blasted off from Florida's John F. Kennedy Space Center. The launch went smoothly, and the spacecraft began its journey toward the moon. But here's a fun fact. Not many people were paying attention to this mission. Why? Because moon landings were starting to feel routine. Little did anyone know, Apollo 13 was about to become anything but routine. Before we get into the drama, let's talk about the spacecraft itself. Apollo 13 had 3 main parts. The Command Module, or CM. This cone-shaped section was where the astronauts spent most of their time. It had all the controls and life support systems. The Lunar Module, or LM, nicknamed the Spider because of its odd shape, this part was designed to land on the moon and bring the astronauts back. The Service Module, or SM. This cylindrical section housed the engine, fuel, and oxygen tanks. It was essentially the heart of the spacecraft. The plan was simple. After leaving Earth's orbit, Apollo 13 would circle the moon. 2 astronauts would then hop into the Lunar Module, land on the moon, collect samples, and return to the Command Module. Finally, they'd all head back to Earth. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, fate had other plans. Fast forward to 55 hours into the mission. The spacecraft was 322,000 kilometers from Earth, cruising toward the moon. Everything seemed normal until, bang, a loud explosion rocked the spacecraft. At first, the astronauts thought it was a prank. Fred Haise was known for his sense of humor, so they figured he was pulling their leg. But when the master alarm started blaring and the electrical power failure light flashed, they realized this was no joke. The explosion had destroyed one of the 2 oxygen tanks in the service module. These tanks were crucial because they supplied oxygen for breathing and power for the spacecraft. To make matters worse, the second oxygen tank was leaking, and 2 of the 3 fuel cells were dead. Commander Lovell quickly radioed Mission Control with the now famous words, "Houston, we've had a problem." Yes, the movie changed it to "Houston, we have a problem," but this is what he actually said. The astronauts were in serious trouble. The command module was losing oxygen fast, and they only had about 15 minutes of breathable air left. To survive, they had to make a quick decision: abandon the command module and move into the lunar module. Here's the catch: the lunar module was designed for 2 astronauts, not 3. It also had limited oxygen and power, but it was their only hope. So all 3 astronauts crammed into the tiny lunar module, which they nicknamed Aquarius. NASA engineers on the ground worked around the clock to figure out how to keep the astronauts alive. They calculated that the lunar module's oxygen supply could last about 2 days. The big question was, how would they get the astronauts back to Earth? NASA had 2 options. Use the main engine. They could fire the main engine to turn the spacecraft around and head straight back to Earth. But there was a problem. The engine was running on the last bit of fuel, and there was no guarantee it would work. If it failed mid-burn, the astronauts would be stranded. Or use the moon's gravity. This option involved slingshotting the spacecraft around the moon and using the lunar module's engine to push them back toward Earth. It was risky because the lunar module's engine wasn't designed for this kind of maneuver. NASA chose the second option. It was a gamble, but it was their best shot. The astronauts would have to fire the lunar module's engine at just the right time and for just the right duration. Any mistake could send them hurtling into deep space forever. The next few days were filled with tension. The astronauts were cold, tired, and running low on water. The lunar module was freezing, and they had to ration their supplies. Meanwhile, the whole world was watching. News outlets that had ignored the mission were now covering it 24/7. As the spacecraft approached the moon, the astronauts fired the lunar module's engine for 35 seconds. It worked. The spacecraft was now on a trajectory back to Earth. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. 2 days later, Apollo 13 was nearing Earth, traveling at a staggering 32,000 kilometers per hour. But before they could re-enter Earth's atmosphere, the astronauts had to perform one last critical maneuver. They had to leave the lunar module and return to the command module. Why? Because only the command module was designed to withstand the intense heat of re-entry. The lunar module would burn up in the atmosphere. The astronauts put on their spacesuits and moved back into the freezing command module. They jettisoned the lunar module and service module, leaving just the command module to face the final challenge. As the command module entered Earth's atmosphere, communication was lost for 3 agonizing minutes. Everyone held their breath. Had the astronauts survived? Finally, a voice crackled over the radio. Cheers erupted at mission control and around the world. The command module's parachutes deployed, and it splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean on April 17, 1970. The astronauts were quickly rescued, and the world celebrated their incredible survival. What started as a routine mission had turned into a story of courage, ingenuity, and teamwork. Now, let's talk about some fun facts about Apollo 13. The explosion that doomed Apollo 13 was caused by a damaged wire inside Oxygen Tank 2, which had overheated during a routine test before the mission. No one realized the damage at the time, and the tank was deemed safe to use. Interestingly, command module pilot Jack Swigert wasn't originally part of the crew. He replaced Ken Mattingly just days before launch because Mattingly was exposed to measles and couldn't fly. Once the crisis began, the astronauts faced another terrifying problem: rising carbon dioxide levels. Lunar module's air filters were designed for 2 people, not 3, so the crew had to improvise a solution using duct tape, plastic bags, and cardboard to create a makeshift filter. To conserve power, they turned off almost all systems in the lunar module, including the heaters, causing temperatures to drop to near freezing. Despite the cold, they had to ration their water supply, as the command module's water was tied to its electrical system, which was shut down. Another little-known fact is that the explosion altered the spacecraft's trajectory. And if not for precise calculations by NASA engineers, the crew could have been lost in space forever. Even the re-entry was a nail-biter. Communication was lost for 3 minutes as the command module entered Earth's atmosphere, leaving everyone on edge. These behind-the-scenes details make Apollo 13's survival story even more incredible. The story of Apollo 13 is a testament to human resilience and the power of teamwork. Against all odds, 3 astronauts and the brilliant minds at NASA turned a potential tragedy into a triumph. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always hope. So what do you think? Isn't this one of the most gripping stories in space history? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories. Until next time, stay curious.